Let's begin by making a new document from scratch. It used to be rare that people would choose File New in Photoshop because they were typically just correcting images that were scanned or captured on their digital camera. Today, Photoshop is very heavily used to create mobile mockups and web mockups. So I'm going to title this Mockup. In a file name, that's also important. I never use anything except letters, numbers, underscore, or hyphen. And I always only use one period, separating my file name from my extension. In addition, your IT department will probably be happy if I tell you not to go past 31 characters for a file name. Now you may say, well, I know Windows can do up to 256 characters, and on the Mac you can name things anything you want. That's because of web-compliant file naming. Many files travel through Unix servers, and on the Unix platform, you want to be careful that you don't do illegal characters. You may have noticed in some of your file attachments, they get %20 in the file name. If I were to type mockup space Kelly, what would happen if this was a JPEG attachment is it would look like this if it traveled through a web server. Other illegal characters like the backslash, the underscore, the question mark, anything that's not a letter or a number have comparable replacements like %20, %40, and so on. And this isn't a JPEG yet. In fact, I'm going to let Photoshop add the extension of PSD when I save this as a Photoshop document. So for now, I just picked my document name. For the width and height, I'm going to be doing a smartphone mockup. And I'll go to the lowest common denominator. Seems everybody on the planet has an iPhone. Well, maybe 60% of the people in North America have one. So I'll go with pixels, and I'll go with an older model. From the first generation iPhone up to the 3s, their width and height were 320 by 480. That's also the size of some of the BlackBerry models and some of the HTC models. Now, there are 3 varying resolutions. Every screen on a smartphone has different resolution settings. So the original iPhone, I think, was around 163 pixels per inch. The BlackBerries might be 217. The HTCs might be 180. I go with a middle number. 180 is sufficient pixels per inch to print great on my inkjet or color laser printer, look beautiful on my screen, although I don't need as much as 180 for screen resolution. Most on-screen images only are 72 pixels per inch. But we need more for the smartphones, and this will help our images look sharper if people pinch pan, which means taking 2 fingers and kind of pinching out to pan in or zoom in. I should say pinch zoom. And everything else here I will leave on the defaults. I don't think I mentioned switching to pixels. So make sure your 320 by 480 is pixels, not inches, because that will make a huge file. I'll click OK, and there is my smartphone screen. And most of them do have the hard corners, but you could round it off if you were designing or doing a mock-up just as the graphic art or graphic artist consultant or designer consultant. You could round off these corners if that's a look and feel you're going for. So I'll start with just a very simple shape, and before drawing the spot for my title bar, I'll change the fill to a dark red. I'm using the new Vector Shape tool, which used to create shape layers, but now creates vector layers. That term has changed in CS6. It is technically a vector layer with the rectangle tool. You'll see that when I draw it. I'll click and drag, and it's okay to go outside the bounds of the image. It can always be resized. Photoshop automatically named that rectangle. I'm going to name it Red Top Bar. And it doesn't matter if you use spaces or underscores here. I'm just so anal about it, I should say. Practice doesn't make perfect. Practicing bad things can make permanent bad habits. So practice good stuff if you want to be perfect. My practice or habits have built up to never use a space anywhere. In layer names, it doesn't matter. I could name this red bar. I could use uppercase characters. It's most important in a file name. So that's all I'm going to do to start. I've created the little nav bar. I usually will also grab an image of the top of my iPhone to insert across the top so you get a full mock-up, but this is only the beginning. So the first time you save a document, it does not matter if you choose Save or Save As. Save As always makes a copy. Since I've never saved this before, Save does the same thing as Save As, which is making your first copy of this document. I will click Desktop on the left, or for the Mac users, if you love shortcuts, Command D will jump you to the desktop. I'll double-click on a Kelly folder that I've created on my desktop for my work. That's what I advise for all class courses. Copy your assets to the desktop, make a folder for your class files on the desktop, and just always go there. That way you won't lose it. I find so many people are naming their files and hitting Return or Enter or clicking Save, and they don't know where they've saved it. Navigate to where you want your file to be before you give it a name. So I'm going to name this Mock-up Home Screen, because I'll have a different Photoshop document for every screen that's going to be in my mobile app. So I'll hit Save. That is saving files. Let's take a look at opening files. I had navigated to my desktop, the Assets folder, and the Lesson 1 folder. So if I want to open a document, Mini Bridge is just the easiest and quickest way. I can double-click on this bridge image to open it up. Single click does not open. You must do a double click in order to open something. So double clicking, I now have these 3 files open, and the document windows are arranged in tabs. The other thing for the Windows users, on the Windows platform, you'll have your close for the program way up at the upper right corner of the application screen. The close for the document will have an X to the right of each file name. So if I wanted to close Restaurant on the Mac, it's on the left. On Windows, it's on the right. I just hit the X. Close Bridge, hit the X. And I chose to save in the PSD format, but if I was finished with this mockup and I'm ready to email a proof to my client, I could do Save As. Save As makes a copy. And when I choose Save As, I'll pick JPEG. JPEG is the most common way to get images back and forth. However, I never save as JPEG the first time. JPEG is a lossy compression, meaning it's trashing data every time you save. If I'm sending mockups, I will start numbering them. You will thank me later or thank yourself later for doing this, because you may go through 20 revisions as you're creating this mockup. Having a number on the file name just lets them know if they're working with the latest one. Some people put the date in the file name if they get only a few a week, but if you might do 2 or 3 revisions in a day, I like the numbering system. And you'll notice it did say this has to be saved as a copy with the selection, because the JPEG will also flatten the layers. So when I hit Save, I can choose a compression ratio, usually between 6 and 8 for web files. At the maximum, my file size would be 37K, which is still tiny. If I type in 8, it's 31K. If I type in 6, it's 29. But at 6 or lower, you'll start to see some JPEG compression noise, visible patterns in your image where it's permanently trashed data. So I'll click OK, and I'm actually still working on the PSD, which is uncompressed and a larger size. So let me explain a little bit about lossy compression. If I double-click on this restaurant image and double-click on Mini Bridge to collapse it, and go to View, Fit on Screen. When Photoshop saves a JPEG, it may look at this wall and decide that 300 pixels in the white can be trashed without losing any quality. So the first save as JPEG trashes 300 pixels worth of data. When I save as JPEG again and change my compression ratio, maybe this time instead of 8, I'm using 7 or 6, it might look at this part of the wall and say, you won't notice if I trash 800 pixels. So now on the second save, you've lost 1100 pixels total. and it gets progressively worse every time you save that JPEG. It's a copy of a copy of a copy. For that reason, PSD is always my master layered document, and I use Save As to make a first-generation JPEG every time. Save As, if you're always working from the PSD, may only throw away 300 pixels, just as a rough example, every time you save. You don't lose 300, then 600, then 800, then 1200. You only use 300 just every time you save, because I'm always starting, in this case, with a PSD file. So I hope that's given you an overview of opening, saving, and creating documents from scratch. There are many other formats to choose, and the primary ones you'll work with will most likely be Photoshop and JPEG. Finally, you can use the old school File Open, and I can hit Desktop or choose Desktop, double-click my Assets folder, double-click my Lesson 1 folder, double-click a file to open it. But what was that, 6 or 8 clicks? I'd rather save the pain my finger has from my repetitive motion disorder and just use Mini Bridge with 1 click and double-click to open an image.